I'm Kimberly McKenzie.
And I'm Paul Nazareth. Welcome to The Intersection.
Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad you're here. We're also really glad to be joined by Ann Rosenfield. Over the past 30 years, Ann has raised millions of dollars for a variety of organizations. She is a teacher, a board member, an executive director, a change maker, a conference planner, and also currently editor of Hilborn charity eNews, Canada's own weekly charity newsletter. Ann sure knows her stuff. And we know that because we know Ann. Paul and I have known her for decades, and she is someone who is always willing to challenge the status quo, look for solutions when folks seem stuck, and will roll up her sleeves to do the heavy lifting whenever it is necessary. So please join us in welcoming Ann to the Hub. Paul, how are you today?
Doing super good. Very excited. Spring's here.
Yeah, I'm loving your background. Those cherry blossoms will be out in the High Park before we know it, right?
Yeah.
So today we have a special treat. Ann Rosenfield is joining us. Ann, are you there?
Here I am.
Are you? Welcome to the Hub. We're so glad you were able to make time for us today.
Thanks for having me. Listen, any excuse to talk to you guys, I'm there.
You're so sweet. So sweet. So today we thought, because you are editor of Hilborn, because you are very wise and experienced, and you clearly see the big picture across the sector, Paul and I thought it might be nice to have a conversation with you about challenging our assumptions and things we wish we had known, and how we're rethinking our approach to the sector. So we're very grateful that you could be here today.
Oh my gosh, like I said, you guys can call me every week and we can talk every week just so that I can hang out with you. So I'm looking forward to this.
So I was thinking about this conversation, and I was thinking about what I wish I had known 23 years ago when I started working in the sector. And what I really, really wish I had known is that I didn't have to wear a skirt to a board meeting to influence change. I wish I had that power now. And I'm wondering, what do you both wish you had known?
I wish I had known, I'm going to quote Rosemary Oliver on this. The only thing your boss cares about is dollars. And so I had wished I had known, there's something I call the curse of the competent. When you're a capable person in an organization, often you'll have all these other tasks that'll get loaded on you. You know, you'll end up doing the company this or the organization that or whatever. And they'll always be like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Except for that when it comes time for your performance to be evaluated, all of a sudden no one's going to remember that 3-month project that you were asked to do. So I'm not saying, say no to everything. What I am saying is that if you're going to do that 3-month project, do it because it's interesting to you. Do it because it's going to help you learn something you're interested in or help you build a skill. But don't necessarily do it just to be a good person, which is a good thing to do. Do it because it will have to be its own reward, because trust me, you will receive no reward for doing it in your work.
Great share. I mean, especially if that project isn't going to drive revenue, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. What about you, Paul?
That's a great one from Ann, because that's how we're hired and fired. Mine is that flexibility will do more for you than certainty. And I always was investing. Okay, if I know this thing, if I get the CFRE, if I learn these plan giving vehicles, if I learn all the tax and law, I'll get that money. And head doesn't matter a damn, because the heart will outmaneuver the head every time. And every time I thought I was certain was when someone knocked my legs out from under me. And that's what so many of my colleagues, it hurts me that happens to them. But that's the big one for me. It's the reason I lost my first job in fundraising. I increased fundraising by 400%. But there was this one little thing I didn't didn't focus on, and they literally said, you didn't do that thing. And that's what we really wanted. So yeah, I mean, again, Anne has done this in her career. I've watched where she's put her body, her life in the way of challenging her assumptions to work for organizations that are big or small or unique or trying different things. And that's where fulfillment, that's where success, that's where impact has really come from.
You know, you make, when you say, I talk about flexibility, I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, if you want to hear God laugh, make plans.
Right. You bet. And that was, that was March 2020 for sure, right? We had
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
things. I'll tell you, I was peaking on some of these amazing plans.
Yeah.
And then the world blew up. And, that's why I'm so excited about this book and some of the discussions, because we've never had a better excuse to put aside our ego, and all of our egos have been decimated.
Mm-hmm.
And so great, you got this excuse to say, all right, let's rethink this thing. It's not just that I was wrong. The information has changed. The world has changed. You're allowed to say, I don't have to do that anymore because I can't.
Yeah.
So Paul, we're reading the same book right now. I think you're a little bit ahead of me. Do you want to just talk about the book for a second, and
Yes.
Then we'll jump into a conversation about it?
Sure. So Think Again by Adam Grant. I've written a recent article for Hilborn on this, but it's one of these, I consider a great book as one that tears up your life. And the further down to the core it gets, the better the quality of the book. Adam did that a little under a decade ago with his book, Give and Take, what I consider to be the best book on networking in a decade. Mm-hmm. And this book, perfect book for this time in our world, to say, how do you rethink? How do you think again? How do you challenge long-held assumptions? And it's tearing me right down to the core of what we do here in charity, philanthropy, social good. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's an incredible piece.
I think a few weeks ago, Anne, I put out on Twitter, because I really do believe this, at 53 years old, 23 years into this career, I feel like I know less today than I knew 15 years ago. I think you were one of the people who I said, does anybody else feel like they don't know anything anymore? And you were like, yes, I do. and so to Paul's point, it absolutely is a really great time to sit back and think differently about ourselves and how we show up in the world and how we add value or don't. And one of the, there are so many, but one of the things that I've just, through reading Adam's book, he talks about the idea of task conflict versus emotional conflict. And that was so interesting to me, because I was thinking about all of the bosses that I have had in my career and how they were really stressful relationships, every single one of them. And yet, I think back on all of them with great respect and fondness. And we accomplished so much together in each one of those organizations. And so this idea of task conflict was really interesting to me, because we need to challenge, don't we? We need to challenge each other. Yeah. Has there been a situation where that has been true for you, either of you?
I'm thinking back.
Paul, I feel like I can see Paul like cracking his knuckles and going,
like, where do I start?
How much time do you have, lady?
It's two things. One is the organization where I could have made the biggest change, with the biggest scope, with the biggest money, with the most influence, was where the team valued being nice and collegial more than anything else, and where we accomplished the least, and I burnt out. Then I went to a team where the leader valued that conflict over intellectual content and not personal, and spent a huge amount of time creating psychological safety and helping people show up their full selves to work, but conflict on the content, so much so that we had this one meeting where we were standing up, and it was the first time I ever swore at an office. And we were yelling in front of the staff, and I went back to my office and was breathing into a paper bag, literally going, and this person came and said, so you know that was good, right? And I was like, no, I don't ever want to do that again. She goes, then you won't work here very long. And she said, how long would you have spent doing that in a a previous, frankly, unionized environment where people valued that niceness? And I said that would have taken 6 weeks to 6 months. She said, it took us 6 minutes. You just almost had to die as part of it. So, get a little bit better at the parry and thrust. Value the outcome more than the nicety and the harmony, and we're going to do great things. And the fact is, that person, we scaled the organization 10 times, massive impact. But that's the challenge. And I challenge a lot of people, corporate people who come into charity, go, I want to come here because everybody's so nice. No. And actually, not nice in that we need to be more activist. We need to be more challenging and stand up for ourselves. But also, there's also a terrible bunch of terrible human beings who made their money crushing human souls and literally fracking the earth. And now they have a foundation. That doesn't make them nice. Right? So this is the time where it's time to go right down to the core and challenge who we are, what we are, and how we do it.
So I'm gonna challenge you. You said something just in passing. I'm gonna challenge you on kind of saying unionized environment, only because I would say I've seen unionized environments that have worked really well for people, and I've seen unionized environments that work really badly for people. So I feel like it's just like anything else.
You're right.
I think a good union can create a great, strong, respectful workplace, and a terrible union can create a terrible workplace. But then there are plenty of non-union shops that are also great workplaces and terrible workplaces. So
because you know what the fact is too, they were talking about how the process, the procedure, the bureaucracy, but I've never been as healthy as I was in that shop, physically, literally, because of the benefits and the structure. And then people know I went to work for a bank, and the fact is, a bank, and this was right after the 2008 crash when banks had recently destroyed the world, but they treated me better as a human being than any charity ever did, and I never forgot that. So it is all about the leader and the team and the culture.
Yep.
Did you know, a small aside, Paul, did you know that I also worked at that bank?
Yes, indeed.
Oh, did you? Okay. Yeah, they were really good to me. They trained me, taught me a lot. Yeah. So one of the things that I've been rethinking lately is the conversation that many folks have been having for quite some time around the difference between donor-centered fundraising and community-centered fundraising. And I have spoken at conferences where I've been up on a podium evangelizing donor love, telling my own little love story. And the more I dig into it, the more I see that actually community-centered fundraising is what the world needs right now. And writing in a way that's engaging for the donor is, of course, a great way to accomplish that. But that those two things don't need to be mutually exclusive. Does that make sense?
I feel that these people who are arguing two completely different systems.
Yeah.
One is arguing public transit, and the other one is arguing individual right to own automobiles.
Yeah.
It is like two completely different things at different scale too.
Yeah, it does seem like there's two different conversations happening. What do you think, Ann?
Well, I mean, there's another piece to this that, in this conversation, people will also often say, and for those of us who are listening, not viewing, you need to know that I'm a cisgendered white straight woman. And so, kind of group of white people will kind of, and like, even if it's all white people in the room, will kind of drop their voices. And there's some of this has been happening in social media and saying, well, but let's face it, all donors are, white people, mostly white guys, right? And, if we're going to talk about questioning assumptions, Kimberly, you're a whippersnapper as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I've been doing this actually longer than you've been doing it. And I go so far back, I remember when I started in my career. And at the start of my career, and I think our sector is still largely structured this way, it was structured for, captains of industry, and they were structured for, the CEOs of major corporations who were disproportionately all white. And then in the 90s, and at the time I was working for a university, I was working in a faculty that had almost all women graduates. And I, actually had someone who was a vice president at that university say to my boss, Ann's a lovely person, but let's face it, people in that female dominated profession aren't going to raise any money because they don't have any money because they're all women. So there was this research coming out of the U.S. from the what it was at the time, the National Network of Women in Philanthropy, which is now the at the Lilly Center for Philanthropy, the Women's Philanthropy Network. And they did some great research in the mid 90s that found that, because at the time the reputation was that women philanthropists, you don't really get gifts from them. They only do special events. They're a ton of work. They never give major gifts. There are lots of work, blah, blah, blah. And these folks, because they were academic, it was Sandra Shaw and Martha Taylor, did actual research that found that, in fact, women gave as generously as men, but they engaged differently as philanthropists. Women were more likely to make an exploratory gift, see how the charity treated them, and then they were more likely to make larger gifts. That women tended overall, as major donors, to be more loyal, that women tended to be less hierarchical about who they spoke with in the organization. So, on the one hand, there was this assumption that everybody who's big money is all male and white and a corporate CEO, and it's no point in talking to anyone else. Sure, maybe for $1,000, but no point in talking to anyone else. And then, we started, working in this range, and then there started getting to be the major gifts and even the mega gifts from women donors. And, the question that really begs is, how much money were we leaving in the table all along with having all male cabinets, with having, when I started in the profession, fundraising was a 75% male profession. So how much money were we leaving on the table because we assumed there was only one kind of donor? And then over the course of my career, I remember similarly, people would say privately, I was living in San Francisco, oh, the gay community, they're so stingy. Well, I think today people would be shocked to hear that people used to say that the gay community was so stingy. The gay community has been incredibly philanthropic to many organizations. So then people used to say, oh, the Chinese community, they don't really give. Well, look at some of the incredible events that we've seen, some of the hospital campaigns that we've seen, some of the mega $1 million gifts. So I think all to say that, over the course of my career, there's consistently been this sort of there's this almost truism, I'm using in quotes, that the only donors are basically still the straight, white, cisgendered captains of industry. Everyone else are bit players, or maybe they came by their money other ways, but they're not the real players. And yet time after time in our profession, fundraisers have challenged that and found that no, in fact, yes, wealth is more concentrated in those communities, but that doesn't mean that they're the only options for us. So I think that's the thing that's also missing in this conversation is, okay, so show me your research. Show me your research that says that these are the only, that white people, that white men are, show me the research that says they're the only possible major donors, not just anecdotal experience. Show me the data.
Which today we finally have, right? So
yes.
Full credit to organizations like Imagine Canada putting out the Immigrant and Newcomer Giving Report just this year, to organizations like TD putting out the Women in Wealth report, StatsCan Canadian data, and organizations like the Foundation for Black Communities and Charity Report, who did reporting on where the money goes when it comes to BIPOC communities. So the cool thing is we're also swimming in data for the first time in a long time to actually prove what we have known for a long time too. So that
so I would say to prove what, there's two we's, right? There's kind of the, we are senior fundraising leadership, but there is a branch of senior fundraising leadership who would completely disagree with your statement, what we've known all along, right? Because we're seeing those people on social media as recently as a week ago saying exactly, donors are disproportionately white. So we've known that all along. It's just we've needed the data to demonstrate what we have intuitively known. And I just want to add to your list the research from Dr. Christian Mehta on this topic about immigrant philanthropy.
Yeah, Canadian diaspora giving. And again, what we know today. That's the other part too,
Yeah.
because we've got to recognize things have changed, right? There was a time where a lot of these things were true because the system was created out of patron and patriarchy. It was that way for a long time. But we know that it's changed, and it's really important that we go out and get the data and pay for it. That's the other challenging thing too. How do we go and pay for it? Because so many other people have either older research or again the anecdotal, because so many people are from the old school.
But I'm going to say yes and I'm going to kind of stick with women's philanthropy because it's a subject area of interest to me. And I'm going to say yes and so the Art Gallery of Ontario, which I love. Mm-hmm. So who gave the original collection to the Art Gallery of Toronto, the original collection in all the land? A woman. A woman donated that land. She donated her art collection. And if you're around the AGO, and I'm unfortunately I forget her name, which if had I known I would have written it down. But part of the reason you don't know her name is that there's a street there named for her husband. Darcy Street is named for her husband. But she came into the marriage with money. He had money too. He died first. Like, she's still the one that was the donor. So the other question I have is how many stories do we have that we've buried of Black philanthropists, of Indigenous philanthropists, of women philanthropists, of Asian community philanthropists? Yes, and I think there are lots of those stories out there. I don't think that the Art Gallery of Ontario is a unique story in North America by any stretch.
And what leg of the race was it? Right? The other part
Sorry,
is,
Paul, can you say that again? I need you a little closer to your mic.
Leg of the race, because again, it's the relay race, and very often we're just paying attention to that home stretch. They get all the glory, right?
Yeah.
But today, when we look at, a lot of social good movements started with a community group, then moved to crowdfunding, then moved to a nonprofit, then moved to a charity, and evolved to a foundation. And that's the one that's getting the glory, right? When, we have to really recognize who started it, who had the idea, who brought it into existence, not just who paid for it, right? And so today, when I'm challenging all those assumptions too, it's hard because as a charity person, as a fundraising person, I've been complaining for the last few years about the crowdfundings of the world, about the volunteer groups that aren't doing it the quote unquote charity or right way. What is right? Right. And so community centered, donor centered, the question is, who's trying to do good? And where does that kernel come from? And how do we fan that flame? As opposed to always saying we'll douse out anything that doesn't fit the mold that we believe in.
So I just want to make sure that I understand what you're both saying. Because I have read a lot about the importance of like for a week, I've been very interested in digging into the decolonization of philanthropy. But if what I'm hearing is there is diversity in fundraising, we're just not telling those stories.
Because again, you have to have the credentials, you have to have the money, you have to have the profile, and there's so many things that keep BIPOC people out, and so many things that keep status quo as it is.
But I do think I don't know much about decolonizing philanthropy, so I can't speak to that topic. What I'm trying to say, not very clearly, is that I think even within colonized philanthropy, there's a much broader range of stories, even within the traditional philanthropy narrative. Another example I would note is that, one of our professional associations, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, was founded in 1960 by 3 men, 2 white, 1 black. So you would think that, we act as a sector as if there's only ever been white fundraisers, that there's, anybody who's not white is somehow an anomaly or a trailblazer or, something new. But in fact, arguably into the roots of probably what is today modern professional fundraising, that was not the whole story then. But over time, I don't feel like we write people out of history, because I think similar to that founder of AFP, and I think similar to that woman who actually gave the money for the Art Gallery of Ontario, I don't think we write them out, because I don't think we write them in the first place.
Yeah.
I don't think they get erased. I don't think they were ever there.
Yeah.
Right. Right. That's that's a great point. And it's such a big, complex issue. It's so easy to get overwhelmed and to not know exactly how to tackle it. But part of it is voicing, well, I'm stumbling because I don't know what to say, but
Well, I think one of the things we can do in our world is start retelling the stories with more information. Like, as I say, I can't speak to decolonizing philanthropy. What I can say, and I feel capable of, is telling those kinds of stories. And if I was working for, sorry, I'll pick on the
fine.
CNIB. The CNIB has a plaque up about this guy, Edgar Robinson, who was the founder of the CNIB library. He was a war veteran who was blinded. But tragically, he died quite young. And so for the next 35 years, his wife kept the library going. Well, why isn't that library named for both of them?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are things we can do within our organizations to me, as I say, bring some of that history back in.
Right.
Say, why aren't we talking about both of these people? Or why aren't we talking more about this situation, right? Bring some of those narratives in, as opposed to taking a very narrow, narrow view.
And I will speak to decolonizing philanthropy. I'm excited. I'm going to be chatting with our North American champion Edgar Villanueva in a couple of days.
Oh, stop! Oh no!
Excited, right? So, but his book Decolonizing Wealth challenged a lot of that, and in his frameworks, he talked a lot about how to shift the gravity of how we talk about it. One is to start unearthing these stories by asking more questions and doing that classic. And of course, we attribute it to European history when indigenous wisdom has this for so long, asking those multiple whys. Why is it this way? How did it start? Why did it start? Where did that money come from? And that's one of the challenges there too. But the other one too is him fundamentally shifting what it is why we're doing it. He talks about how money can be medicine. And so many times philanthropy, we haven't admitted, can also do harm because it's reinforcing those wrong systems that we built. So, we're lucky in Canada to have, the Circle on Aboriginal Philanthropy, who has this declaration that Canadian charities can be part of, to say, how can we restart? My only challenge and my fear is I am very afraid that we are going to take this engine apart while we're driving the car on the highway.
Yeah.
Right? You talked about that bottom line. Nobody's boss is going to change their fundraising goals, right? If we're challenging fundraising and have to deconstruct the thing down to the studs, nobody's going to stop fundraising. Everybody still has fundraising goals. The machine still has to happen. And so I'm so confused about how can we figure out how to do this while the whole thing is still going.
I completely share that line of thinking with you, because if our traditional construct is, well, let me take a sidestep. My daughter's boyfriend was telling me the other night that he worked for a company in Papua New Guinea. And there, when organizations run up to conflict, or if somebody has a problem with what somebody said, then a little wooden doll gets placed outside the door, and everything stops until they resolve the issue that brought that doll forward. And I was reading about this article on decolonizing philanthropy and thinking about the way our board of directors are governed. And it's a very, Robert's Rules of Order. It's sort of a corporate way of making decisions. And what would happen, how could we blow up that system so that we can have more diverse experiences at the decision-making table and feel more than an other at the table, right? So I think we do need to take a big step back if we could and think about our boards functioning in an inclusive way.
I'm just afraid because I also know that it functions less like the Papua New Guinea doll and more like the horse's head in The Godfather 2, with white fragility being what it is. We challenge any of these systems, and I just also know people are going to be like, fine, cool, y'all have these discussions, I'll stop giving. I'll take myself out of the equation and you try to make it float.
I think that's the big risk. And
I think then, so like, yeah, I would say a few things, kind of including kind of like who says, right? Who says that, speaking broadly, not about individual organizations, but who says that the charity sector is working all that well right now anyway, right?
fair.
Charities for the most part, everyone, there's a lot of issues around boards. There's a lot of issues around boards. One of the things that is interesting to me about boards is boards, when there's a challenge, my observation is boards tend to rise to the challenge. So COVID has been a difficult time, but probably been a great time in terms of boards. Like boards have probably been very engaged, overall have probably tended on balance to be actually very helpful. It's actually been probably pretty strong. But generally, in non-COVID times, unless there's an organization crisis, there's a whole problem with keeping boards engaged. And, in fundraising, capital campaigns always hit the doldrums at about the 80% raised mark and then really have a tremendous amount of trouble reaching the last 20%. And there's a lot of good data to show it's not even 80-20 these days in terms of giving. It's more like 1 in 99. So, those all seem to me to be pretty big canary and coal mine types of situations. So, sure, we can get better at what we do. We can be more effective at what we can do. This time is a time for us to say, but was it really actually broadly really working all that well to begin with?
Yeah. One of my worries is that when we all get vaccinated and COVID goes away, that charities are going to think they can just go back to the way they used to function. And there's been a lot of innovation and agility in the sector that I hope that we can keep.
Well, or will we kind of, I think there's lots of questions. One of the things this moment has done is, for example, with, kind of who we consider to be part of the, what is that? I feel like, Paul, this would be a thing you'd say, who can play in our sandbox? We've generally said people with disabilities, if, you have to be able to haul yourself to an office somewhere 5 days a week for 40 hours a week. And if you would get to that office using Wheel-Trans, or if you need to work some kind of have some kind of accommodations, then we as a society have said, you know what, thanks, we don't really need you. We have something like 80% unemployment for people with disabilities. I think the equal concern as the charity sector is not only if we've changed the way we work on so many levels. And so then this is a moment to say, hey, who says we all have to be in offices 5 days a week, 40 hours a week? Like, why can't we have, if there are people who are more introverted, and, if there are whole areas of work that honestly you can probably do just as well from home, that can be evaluated just as effectively with people working from home, data work, prospect research work, a lot of direct response work, a lot of social media. like, and even, we're finding out a surprising amount of major gifts doesn't seem to need like Zoom and telephone have
Right.
replaced a lot of in-person meetings.
Yeah.
So why don't we say, here's a crazy idea. Instead of saying, we're going to make Kimberly and Paul and Ann as colleagues all come to the same office for the same working hours every day, even though Kimberly, Paul, and Ann they all work in fundraising, but they have 3 different jobs. Why don't we say instead, how can we optimize how each of those people work? And why don't we be results driven instead of being, cookie cutter factory driven? And then let's see how people do. Like, we've done this big experiment for the last year. Let's keep it going.
I
And
agree.
what's the thing that was holding us back the whole time? Pants.
Pants.
Because the world's creativity been unleashed now that very few people are wearing pants. I'm being facetious, but I think the big thing is we'll never
You have pants on right now, Paul?
I've worn pants in like a year. Gym shorts is the key, but we'll never have a better time where we have this reset on so many levels to rebuild. When they say build back better,
yeah,
I think we've got a real chance to ask the questions and to build back flexibly for what everybody needs. Again, equality and equity doesn't mean doing everything the same.
Yeah.
Right. But that's
Yeah.
the other part too. I think there's a lot of people dying to get back to the office. I got small kids. If you give me a porta potty, I would work in it. But what's that flexibility? The time of hours, the location, the remoteness, the technology. I think that's the part where I'm seeing people really do the big rethink.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because then that can also start to affect who we're employing and how we're employing them, right?
And also, from my perspective, being able to connect more with people online has taken away all of the geographical boundaries around that. And the women in the hub conversations that we're having, we had the first one yesterday, there were women on 4 different continents who came together, who never would have been able to do that otherwise. And it was just so special. It was so special. It was really, really uplifting to be able to broaden a network and see that there's more than my local AFP chapter to connect with.
And shout out to, UK. If Show the Salary didn't come over across the sea, would we have been in the totally new landscape that we find ourselves today? And ask even better questions than just Show the Salary, which is, why does a job that's raising money require a university degree?
Yeah.
Right. And all those questions. So yeah, the world opening up again, I think, has given us better questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think to your point, Kimberly, do we, people are so, it feels like we've been living, in a mix master for the last, 13 months, right? Like, we've been on like spin the whole time. I feel like I might be quoting Rob Peacock there. So, like TM on that one, because I think he always talked about things being on spin cycle. But are people going to just so long for what they think of as normal that then are they going to kind of drive back to the office and then maybe a month in go, or 6 months in go, wait, you know what I mean? Like, wait, actually, there were benefits to working from home, and actually I'd like to maybe do halvesy, but do you know what I mean? Like, employers thinking about how to bring back folks in ways, getting all of us, including employers and employees, to think about, what do I want my work to look like in 2025, and then reverse engineer from there, as opposed to saying, okay, like blow a whistle, COVID game over, back into the office, people.
That is such a great, great point. That, my wish in Kimberly's dream world, it would be that every single organization sits down and has that conversation, not let's go back to normal, but I know it's cliche, but how do we build better? What have we learned? What did we gain? There's an authenticity, there's an emotion, there's a deeper connection, deeper conversations are happening now. How do we keep that vulnerability moving forward in our new normal? So
I think so actually I'm going to go a little bit on a variation on a theme
sure.
here.
Yeah, do
Because
it.
I think there's some things about flexibility, and this may be me because I'm old school. I am super anxious about vulnerability in the workplace because I feel like it always comes back to bite the person in the behind. So it's not that I don't think it's a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I really worry though about people. I feel like this whole bring your whole self
Mm-hmm.
question is it's sort of like years ago when I was taking a new job and I had a coworker taking a new job at the same time. And the organization said, "Oh, we're a family friendly workplace." And she said, "Well, we'll see how true that is the first time I call in and tell you I can't come to work because my kid's sick."
Mm-hmm.
So, sure, bring your whole self to work. I just worry that your employer will say, bring yourself whole self to work. Yeah, yeah. But, when you call in sick for mental health reasons, when you say that because of your anxiety, you need to be working from home, when you need to take a leave for 3 months for, treatment of some sort or whatever, is your employer really going to embrace your whole self, or are they going to just kind of quietly bide their time until they package you out?
You got to articulate what that means as a team culture, right? And
Yeah.
actually, a great podcast recently with our author Adam Grant and Brene Brown,
Mm-hmm.
talking about how vulnerability does not mean total disclosure.
They're going to come on this podcast, Paul.
Yes, that's a
Laughs every time I say that.
But it's a great one to help people understand how do you create psychological safety, a
right,
big part as well. And then again, question those pieces. I was in a spiritual discussion recently where a group brought up one of my favorite podcasters, Rabbi Brian with the 77%, who said, we talk a lot about the golden rule, but we've come to know in the past number of decades the platinum rule. He said the golden rule is treat people like you would like to be treated. But guess what? You treat yourself like garbage. Right? So the platinum rule is treating other people the way they need to be treated, and ask them how they want to be treated, as opposed to you assuming how they want to be treated, because that's you. Because again, society was built on a very particular mold with only two shapes, and we now know that there's so much more. So again, that's the build back. I think again, that flexibility for me, what it comes back to say, it's more about matching than prescription. A dialogue rather than the monologue, and so many of our workplaces are the monologue, right? We're looking for X and you fill that description or you don't work here. And that's the part where I think people are building better. Everything, workplaces, philanthropy, all of it.
I agree.
That my mom always says that sound is the sound of an angel flying overhead.
Yeah, it's like I love how these conversations just have a natural arc to them, and you just know, oh, okay, here we are. Until next time, guys. Thanks.
Bye.
And thank you so much for your authenticity and your candor. We really enjoyed chatting with you. And thanks to all of you for listening. If we left you with more questions than answers, you are, of course, always welcome to continue this conversation on a variety of platforms. Just visit intersectionhub.ca and it will tell you where to find us. And of course, we'd be very grateful if you would share this podcast, subscribe, comment below. The more engaged we are, the more people will get to hear it. So thank you for spending time here, and we'll see you next time.